Hey, what's going on, guys? It's me again, Golden Blue Dude, with yet another video for today. And today we have a special guest for you. We have the sideline reporter, the one and only Jed Drennings, the sideline reporter for West Virginia University. I am very excited to have him on the show, and we're going to get his insight on a couple of things that I had in mind. Yes, sir. How are you doing today?
How you doing, Chris?
Pretty good. First off, I wanted to thank you because I know you have a super busy schedule, so I wanted to thank you for setting aside some time to come on Golden Blue Dude. We're on our way to 5,000 subscribers, so this is a big deal for us. I really appreciate it.
Sure thing.
So we talked over the phone before the show, and there was a few things that we wanted to talk about. The first thing, well, is kind of obvious, is the guaranteed rate ball against Minnesota. What's the feeling up there in Morgantown as far as, you know, how that's going to go? Because the game is going to be much later than, you know, most of those guys are used to. It's against a team we've never played. Is there a lot of nerves going on or a lot of confidence? How would you say the feeling is around there?
There's always going to be some unknowns that are attendant to bowl matchups. At least typically that's the case. From kickoff time, that's not really going to matter. I mean, that's something that from a preparation standpoint, you could even push your practices later, and that's what the program's done. Have the kids practice a little later to orient their bodies toward that later kickoff time. You have the time change, some other things at play, but the bigger thing is it's a true test against a really well-coached and nasty Minnesota football team that is really a handful of plays away from being a 10-2 team instead of an 8-4 team. They're sound in all three phases. They're well coached with PJ Fleck and his staff. They get physical on the offensive side. They get big. They test your will. They try and push you around. On the defensive side, they're very technically sound, fundamentally sound. They've made incredible improvements from last year to this year. They really struggle with some of the environment with the COVID situation. Defensively, that's been rectified with Joe Rossi and that staff. What a great job he's done during his time there. And then from a special team standpoint, they're very sound. So they're going to present challenges in all three phases. PJ Fleck's bowl record will reflect that. They've won a couple in a row under him. They've done some things in his short time in Minneapolis that haven't been done there in quite some time. So they're believing in the oar in the water approach to this and row the boat. That's what they've been doing. They've been picking up what he's putting down, and it's worked well for them, and they become a factor in the Big Ten West.
Absolutely. The biggest thing that I'm looking at in this game is going to be the quarterback battle. And I looked at both Tanner Morgan and Jarrett Doege, and for all the flack that Jarrett Doege has taken over the season, statistically, he's actually had a better season than Tanner Morgan, and that kind of blew me away. I think the biggest key for West Virginia, in my opinion, for this game is the running game, because if you go back and look at this season, Letty Brown went over 100 yards just 4 times the entire year, but all 4 games we won. The key to the game, in my opinion, is getting the run game going. If we can have a good established run game, I think we can beat Minnesota. If we struggle in the run game, could be a long day for West Virginia.
And that's a tall order, too. They're among the national leaders in rush defense for a reason. I do think you have to have enough pretense of a run game to keep them honest, but this is also the type of game that you might in fact approach it that, you know, your quick pass game's an extension of the run game as well. So as long as you're controlling the flow of the football game by keeping them honest by running the football, getting it out of Jarrett's hand quickly, and throwing some different looks at them, and then being on your toes for whatever different looks they throw at you. That's what bowl season's all about. So I think you do have to have multiple dimensions offensively. The last thing you can do against a talented, well-coached defense is allow them to reduce you to just one dimension, because then they'll just sit out and disintegrate that one dimension. So you got to play pitch and catch, get the ball out quick, we'll mash protects, take some shots downfield, but yeah, run the ball enough to keep them honest as well. But again, they're technically sound, they're fundamentally sound, they understand their pursuit angles, they're not flashy, they're just always in the right spot, and they like to play a lot of zone coverage. You get eyes on the football and force turnovers, and you can't let them do that, and you can't fall into their traps of what they'll try and set up, because that's what well-coached defenses will do, is lure you into that. But I also think a fast start's going to be critical, because when you look at PJ Fleck's record, when they lead after one quarter, when they lead at the half, I mean, it's just off the charts in terms of how successful they've been with those early leads. So you can't allow that to happen.
Right, and my biggest concern personally would be our offensive line that struggled throughout the year, and Minnesota has a pretty decent defensive line. So that's really the matchup that I'm looking for, is our offensive line line versus their defensive line. All right, let's transition to the future of West Virginia. Had a pretty good recruiting class this year. It was higher at one point. We had Justin Williams, a 4-star. He committed to Tennessee. And then wide receiver Kevin Thomas, he was a 3-star. Last time I checked, he wasn't signed. Two losses that hurt us, but I think we recovered fairly well with some guys that I didn't even know were on our radar. So I think we built a good recruiting class. What pops out to you the most from this recruiting class? Who are you keeping your eyes on the most?
Well, I think it's the collective. It's the first time when you look at the nature of a recruiting cycle. A true recruiting cycle is not just 2 years, we're probably a little over 2 years. And this is the first time that Neil Brown and his staff were able to do that and take a full swing without some kind of disruption. By disruption, I mean COVID. So when you consider it that way, first of all, he arrived on campus 3 years ago in early 2019 trying to make the most of the situation of the class that he kind of inherited. And then last year, you kind of had to make the best type of run that you could with half a recruiting cycle. But this year was more of a full cycle. So you had an opportunity to forge relationships, do a proper evaluation on all these targets and all these kids, and address needs, both short-term and long-term. And the nature of it is it's all about striking that balance. I mean, you're going to have the lifeblood of your program is going to come from the high school level, but you're still going to have to plug and play some of these JC kids, some of these Division I transfers. And I think that the staff has done a great job of striking a very sensible balance between those two things and addressing the needs that we might have, whether it's needs a couple years down the road or needs more immediately. So, and I think that on every level of the defense and just about every level of the offense, I think that was addressed. It's all going to start with your quarterback. When people want to talk about that, when you have somebody with the upside that Nico has, I think there's some promising things there. He checks every box. He has tremendous arm talent. So to bring him into a quarterback room, whatever that might look like in the spring, I think fosters tremendous competition because we're happy with the kids we had there already as well. So to throw Nico into that mix, that's going to be fascinating to watch that unfold. And they're going to bring out the best in each other. From a skill standpoint, when you look at the wideouts we were able to bring in, you addressed it from both the junior college level, the high school level, 4 big-bodied O-linemen that I think have a bright future as well. I mean, across the board offensively, I think some needs were addressed, and the same thing on the defensive side. You're always going to need those playmakers at the point of attack to populate that defensive line. You're going to need some versatility. We got some of those types of players that can play multiple positions. And, of course, we got some of those cover guys on the back end as well. So hosts of guys that you can be excited about with their future with this program.
I agree with that. Now, besides Jacoby Spells and Nico Markiel, there's 2 other names that really popped out to me. And we all know that Lady Brown is going to be gone after this year. And we went out and got Lynn J. Dixon, the transfer from Clemson. And this guy is very talented, highly touted out of high school. He did have some locker room issues. That can be straightened out. But the name that hasn't been talked about enough, in my opinion, after watching his game film, is Mumu Ben Wanhad, the cornerback that we grabbed. Now, he's labeled as only a 3-star, but I looked at his film, and I think he should be a 4-star. Maybe not the most athletic person, but his defensive football smarts is off the charts. He knows exactly where to be. He knows how to read formations on the offense. He recognizes trends. Mumu Ben Wanhad, that's a name to keep your eyes on, and that's not degrading any other names on this list. We had a great recruiting class, but his name really pops out, and I think he's going to give our defense a big-time presence and might turn out to be the future leader of our defense. So I really like that we were able to pick up Mumu Ben Wanhad. Let's talk about our schedule for next year. Very, very exciting schedule, especially when it comes to out-of-conference. We start the season on the road to Pitt. I'm going to be at that game. Believe it or not, I'm actually friends with a Pitt fan. We actually get along. So I'm going to a game at Heinz Field with a Pitt fan. Very excited about that. I think we'll actually help Pitt pack out that stadium because they have trouble packing it out. What's your feelings on the backyard brawl being renewed?
Well, the truth is, if you look at it from a scheduling standpoint, I haven't checked soup to nuts, alpha to omega, but I can't imagine there's many teams that open the season on the road against Power 5 opponents in consecutive years, and that's what West Virginia is about to do. We opened the season, of course, this year at Maryland and College Park, and next year, as you mentioned, we're at Heinz Field against Pitt. So we don't really shy away from anybody. It's nice to get the regional rivals back on the schedule, Pitt being one of them, Virginia Tech being another. But the challenges will present themselves right out of the gate. I mean, some of these other programs, particularly some of the other programs in the Big 12, they schedule in such a way that they really put themselves in position to knock the rust off and find themselves through the course of the off season, or not the off season, but the early non-conference portion of their schedule. You know, Baylor would be one of those teams. I mean, Baylor had some struggles early on, but those struggles weren't exposed because of the way they scheduled the early portion of their schedule, put that together. They didn't have some massive challenges early on, I should say. By the time they got their sea legs under them and knocked the rust off and realized who they were ready for it. That's not the case with West Virginia. We don't get those breaks. We don't get those layups. We don't get a chance to knock the rust off. You got to be in mid-season form, unlike other teams, right out of the gate. And that is a tall challenge. I mean, just imagine what it would have been like to, instead of play an incredibly dangerous, talented, and healthy Maryland team, let's say you played them in October and November. That would have been a far different challenge than it was playing them on opening day when they believed in themselves and had all the hope in the world. But that's the case. That's the assignment we draw. So you better come ready to play your best football, unlike a lot of other teams. You better play your best football right out of the gates with multiple challenges that a lot of other programs aren't going to face early on. And if you can find a way to navigate through those landmines, then that obviously serves you very well as you move into your conference schedule.
Yeah, I looked at those first 5 games at Pitt, Kansas, who's getting better and better. Then we have our FCS Towson, then at Virginia Tech, and then at Texas. That's a tough start to the season. I mean, 3 road games out of our first 5 games at Pitt, at Virginia Tech, at Texas. That's going to be a bit tricky.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, like I said, from a scheduling standpoint, when you compare the 3 non-league games that we're going to play, typically from a scheduling standpoint, you're out of necessity to some extent going to have to bring in on occasion one of the FCS programs. Now, part of that's a function of when you're a 10-team league like the Big 12 has been, what that means is you have 9 conference opponents. When you have 9 conference opponents every year and you're playing round robin, that means one year you have 5 conference home games and the next year you have 4. So to plug that hole, sometimes you're going to need an FCS program to come in and plug that hole. You can get more creative and find a way to solve it otherwise. But with multiple Power 5 tests outside of the Big 12, we challenge ourselves early in the season in a way that not a lot of other teams do. Many other teams have that luxury of figuring out who they are while they win 2 or 3 games early in the year. West Virginia hasn't been afforded that luxury.
Absolutely.
We don't have the luxury of knocking the rust off and figuring out who we are. Even if we struggle, we're 2-1 or 3-0 to start the conference slate. We need to have our act together very early, and that kind of challenge has you battle tested as you move into league play.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the feeling around Neal Brown, the atmosphere. I know a lot of fans were kind of let down with the 6-6, but I kind of looked at the overall picture. 4 of those 6 losses were in 50-50 football games. We could have won those games, and I know it's still a loss, but it's not like we took a huge step back and we were getting the brakes beaten off us and we looked like a bad team the entire year. We just had some games where either we couldn't finish or we let our opponent, get the last play, like a last-second field goal in. So what's the feeling around Morgantown as far as in regards to Neal Brown? Is everybody still trusting in the climb?
As far as the fan base goes, I would have to guess. I would imagine. I can tell you what happens within the building, and there's tremendous energy within the building as we have a vision of where this thing's going and where it has been, and the challenge that we were presented with, that the staff was presented with 3 years ago when he took that job after losing what we lost following that 18 season. We recognized that first spring of 2019, this wasn't going to be a short-term rebuild. So now it's a function of step one is building a program that can put you in games where you have an opportunity to make a play in the fourth quarter and win. You don't just show up and find yourself in a tie game with Oklahoma with 5 minutes to go in the game in Norman. You don't just show up and do that. I mean, the difficult part of it is building the program that can be in a tie game in Norman with 5 minutes left and an opportunity to win. Then, once the appropriate maturity is developed around the different portions of the program and different position groups, those kids learn to win those tight games. And that's something that later in the season, when you saw what we did against Iowa State, when you saw what we did against Texas, and even the Kansas game to some extent, we started making those plays later in those games when earlier in the season we weren't. Right. When you look at some of the schools that were beating us in those games, they were more battle-tested programs that had been through some of those types of games, whereas we weren't. We were a young team early in the season that grew over the arc of the season, and I think we were playing our best football football by the time those last couple games were played. So, I mean, that's what it's a function of. Again, Bobby Bowden always said, when you're building a program, now Neil wasn't building a program, he was rebuilding a program. I mean, that's the nature of it. It was a true rebuild. He always said when you're building a program, there's 4 steps. First, you lose big, then you lose close, then you win close, and then finally you win big. And I would add there's a 5th step, and that's handling the prosperity of winning big. When you look at the 4 steps and where we are or where we aren't, again, you don't just show up off the street and stumble into a tie game against teams like Oklahoma and Norman late in the game. I mean, that is very, very difficult to build a team that can be in position to make a play and win that game. Now, the next step, after you've done the hard part of building that team, is maturing that team to make those final plays in the late going to benefit from the opportunities that you've created by putting yourselves in position to have opportunities in those tight games. So that's the next step. And we started taking that step down the stretch. Now let's see how we turn out against, like I said, a very talented Minnesota team, and see what plays out in the bowl game with another opportunity on the horizon. It'd be great to finish with an exclamation point as an underdog yet again against these guys. So let's see how it goes.
I 100% agree with you. In fact, I'm glad you brought up those 4 steps, because I have been preaching those 4 steps. You can't go from our 2019 where we had no talent, losing big, to winning games that you have no business winning. You have to build on top of it. You have to put yourself in position, and then you get the maturity to where you can have those last plays to pull off the win. So I 100% agree with you, and I've been called a Neil Brown apologist because I haven't backed down from my stance. I am a Neil Brown guy. I do believe in what he's doing, and I'm still trusting the climb. So I very much appreciate you saying what you did, and I agree. Tell everybody where they can find you before we wrap this up.
You can follow me on Twitter at the Signal Caller. That's probably the easiest place.
Like I said at the beginning of the show, man, I 100% appreciate you giving me the time and coming on the show, because I know you are a very busy man. Hopefully we can get you on the show in the future as well. It was awesome.
You have a good one, and you have a happy holiday, all right?
You as well, bud. I appreciate it. Thank you. There you go, Jed Drennings, the sideline reporter for West Virginia, saying some of the same exact things that I've been trying to tell you. Everybody's been looking at the 6-6, 6-6. You know, last year we went to a bowl and we had a winning season, which we actually have the chance of doing that again. I was guilty of it. I set our expectations really high. If you listen to what he was saying and what I've been telling you, there are steps to building a championship football program. We're about on the 3rd step. We can put ourselves in position to win the game. Now we just need the maturity to make the plays to win those games. We'll see how the Guaranteed Rate Bowl goes. I think West Virginia has a pretty good shot of beating Minnesota, but the big matchup, our offensive line against their defensive line. Hope you enjoyed the show. We're going to have more guests here on Going to Blue Dude. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.